Good evening and welcome to episode 90 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Kumalo. These episodes seem to be flying by. I can't believe we've already reached episode 90. And of course, that means we're counting down to our 100th episode. I want to hear from you. What are you looking forward to for episode 100? We're still playing around with a few ideas about what to do for episode 100. So we certainly want to hear what you would want to see for episode 100. Well, of course, this evening we are exploring everything that has to do with property. And this evening we're going to be looking at 4 ways that COVID has affected the South African real estate industry. We all know that every industry has been hard hit by by COVID-19, not just in South Africa, but across the world. We've certainly seen mass retrenchments across different industries, but we've also been seeing, when you look at the real estate sector, the effects of the, lower interest rates and the activity that that's had on the real estate sector. So we certainly want to be looking at what the effect the COVID-19 crisis has had on real estate in South Africa, and to help us better understand and just talk through what some of the effects of this crisis has been. And maybe even later on in the show, we'll explore some of the opportunities that could potentially arise because of the crisis. I'm joined this evening by Kim Bailey, who's a sales agent at Seeff Property Group. Good evening, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me onto your show.
So, I've been saying to viewers at home this week that it's freezing cold. I'm in Gauteng. I know you're in the Western Cape. So we have the Western Cape to blame for the very dismal weather that we're having. We were already, slowly ushering in spring. And now we're back in the middle of winter in Joburg. So we all have the Western Cape and the cold front from that side of the world to blame for this one. But of course, Kim, we're talking property this evening and not the weather. I think one of the things that, people at home, and certainly myself, would probably want to know when it comes to the effects of COVID on the South African real estate market would be what the sales market, or how the sales market has essentially changed. We saw the effects, for example, in the very early stages of lockdown. We had a hard lockdown. Even the deeds offices were obviously closed. So there was essentially zero movement for that 21-day period. And as the different levels kind of went in and the restrictions were slowly eased, we're certainly seeing more and more activity in the real estate sector. Perhaps take us through, what the effects when it comes to sales in property has been like during this COVID-19 crisis.
So, I think a lot of specialists predicted there was going to be a massive drop-off of the property sales activity, and yet quite the opposite has actually happened. It's a lot of people have said, has it been for the worse? Has it been for the better? And I think it's actually created a massive opportunity for investors, and I think it's also been dire for the other sector of the market. So it's for the better and for the worse. COVID certainly brought out the good and the bad out of the situation.
And Kim, what would you say were some of the main changes that we've certainly seen during this crisis? I think a lot of different players are trying to find different innovative ways that they can do business, and not just in real estate. We're seeing it, sort of across the board, because you wanted to be able to be in business during the different levels of lockdown. But of course, because as humans, we're now also adapting the way that we are either doing business. You're certainly looking at people who have big office spaces and how a lot of their offices are now essentially vacant, or certainly empty, perhaps not vacant just yet, but they're empty because the bigger portion of their workforce are still working from home. Certain people are still not feeling safe enough to go back physically to the office, even though we're in level 2. And luckily, there are certainly people who are fortunate enough to have that option. What would you say have been some of the main changes that we've seen in terms of the real estate sector because of COVID?
Well, I think a lot of things just literally came to a grinding halt overnight. We were told not to go to the offices anymore. We had to then enter into these Zoom meetings. I think that the property market as well, we as agents weren't able to take our buyers out to physically see properties. So we had to really think out the box. And I do believe that the digital side of things and the techno side of things went leaps and bounds ahead into the future because we were forced to do so. I think that regarding the market as such, I think COVID has had a massive impact on your short-term letting. For instance, just as an example, I deal in an area where 80% of the apartments that I sell, or the area that I sell in are rented out. And a lot of those owners suddenly now have their properties that they haven't been able to let them out. So that was a massive negative for a lot of those owners. So the short-term letting, as I say, came to a grinding halt. The office situation changed. We had to then do Zoom meetings, and it's difficult. A lot of people would go to the office to get that encouragement from their teammates, and now suddenly you're going to have to be at home and self-motivate yourself. But the positives, which I wanted to touch on earlier, the two positives that it certainly has brought about is the low interest rates. Those low interest rates has been able to create a new found interest on first-time buyers. First-time buyers that were possibly never able to afford the interest rates to buy for their own home. And also the international market has certainly picked up. We were very busy over lockdown because of the weak rand. So that's why the activity we kicked it out the park. It was very busy.
I mean, I can imagine if you're probably sitting, perhaps you're in Europe, or even in America, perhaps even Australia, you're looking at SA real estate and you're thinking this is actually a bargain for you because the rand is quite weak. I think when you look at a lot of the guys who are buying from abroad, they typically tend to like South Africa because the property sector is fairly stable. And more often than not, they tend to get quite a lot of value for their money. One of the things that you mentioned, Kim, is the effect that this has had on short-term letting. I know a lot of investors who are, for example, in Airbnbs, and how their Airbnb businesses almost came to a halt, essentially, because a lot of the clients who would come on were typically tourists and people who are traveling, whether from outside of SA or certainly within the country. And now that we're not able to do that, and the tourism sector had also been affected, they weren't able to access, or rather their properties weren't able to be accessed by those customers. You're also seeing, of course, some business travelers, and even business travel wasn't happening at the various stages of lockdown. So short-term letting has certainly been affected. From our viewers at home, I simply want to hear from you how the COVID-19, if you're a property investor, has affected you. Perhaps you're also into the Airbnb space and you saw that you're not getting as many bookings and you weren't able to quickly come up with a solution where perhaps you have a 6-month lease instead of doing the 2-day, 3-day stay for your particular apartment. Certainly share with us how this COVID-19 crisis has affected your real estate, we'll say business or portfolio, and perhaps the different ways you've been able to manage it. Because I think some people have been able, Kim, to see the different opportunities that this crisis has brought forward and are taking advantage of it as much as possible. So if you're at home and you're an investor who's been able to take advantage of this particular crisis, we certainly want to find out how you are doing so. Now, Kim, when we look at the property sector, I mean, there are obviously I'll say different markets, whether you're looking at obviously sales or rentals, but also different LSM groups. What would you say have been, I'll say, the differences in the different markets? Or even when we compare, let's say, residential with commercial, perhaps even industrial, have you been able to see, a difference in those different spaces due to the effects of COVID?
Definitely. I mean, if I look at the commercial side, I think that they've probably been more affected than the property sector because the property market was able to resume in June. We were able to meet the clients, take them through. So there was only a few months that we had to work remotely. Whereas the commercial side, I drive down many roads and I see to let. And I think many of those businesses are still not able to resume work. So that I think that the commercial side has been more affected, and also because we've been forced to possibly buy online, a lot of those businesses where you could go in and touch and feel, now you can buy that same item online. So the guys haven't been walking down the streets and walking into businesses. I mean, that hasn't happened, and many of those businesses are still not running. They're still not opened. So the commercial side of things, I feel desperately sorry for a lot of those shop owners and the commercial side.
And one of the unfortunate things, Kim, has been that even when you look at the residential side, where you're able to do, I mean, we saw the rise of virtual tours, for example, especially during lockdown when agents couldn't take us to the various properties. So we saw different, really amazing virtual tours, which is something that I hope, will certainly stay throughout, even post-lockdown. But there's still a lot of us as property investors, and even people who are buying their first homes, you wanted to physically go and view an apartment, whether you are renting it or you are buying it. There's still something about physically going and viewing something, because you certainly know that an agent might take really great pictures, or even when they do the video, but just buying a residential apartment or even a house without physically going to view, still one of those things that I think a lot of us probably wouldn't do. And we always even say on the show, you don't want to, especially for beginners, you don't want to buy before viewing. So you have to go physically look at the property and see if there's anything that you're spotting. Have you seen that, as the restrictions have eased slightly, Kim, that more and more people are certainly viewing properties, because we obviously couldn't view as much as we could before?
Well, I love Google Earth, for instance. So oftentimes I'll go on Google Earth. I want to go and see what New York looks like or something, but it is completely different to actually standing on that street. And it's the same thing. If I had to meet you in person, it would be a completely different feeling as I am feeling right now looking at you through a TV screen. So it's exactly the same with property. People need to touch, they need to see, they need to feel, they need to get that, oh, sure, I'm feeling like this is the right property for me the moment they walk in the door. I know I've bought a property like that myself. I walked through that kitchen door and I knew straight away it was my house. But if I was taking a virtual tour, I definitely wouldn't have got the same feeling. So I definitely do believe in the market, and the agencies really thought out the box and had these art shows, which I thought were absolutely fantastic, but they had to offer something, because they couldn't go completely into the dark and be quiet and not offer their buyers or sellers a service. So I thought that was exceptional and very much, into the future, but I definitely don't think it's something that's sustainable. No one, and if they can go and look at a property and they've got the opportunity to look at a property, they're going to do that. They're not going to buy it off an art show or through a virtual tour. It might help them to get them through the door, or to get, to take that appointment with them. But I don't think it's something that it will go into the future, personally.
I've certainly seen, when you look at, for example, the US, the UK, even Australia, virtual tours are on the rise. I mean, and there are different production factors that go into it, which is fantastic, as you're saying. But physically going into an apartment definitely does give you a different feel altogether. So I think it could be one of those things that consumers will look for as a way to shortlist, where they can look at the tour, go on the virtual tour and be like, oh, okay, at least I was able to get a better sense of XYZ that a static picture wouldn't necessarily give me, and use that to shortlist for which places they're going to view. But viewing still plays such an integral part of our property journey. And I do agree with you. I don't think it's one of those things that people are going to suddenly not want because we are becoming more and more technological, or because we're using more digital tools. It certainly is going to be one of those things that is still important across the board. I think if anything, whatever digital tools are used are going to be an addition to us still wanting to view a place. Kim, I want us to go for a quick break, and when we come back, I want us to look at the different ways that COVID has essentially changed the way that real estate agents do business. We've already slowly started touching on this, and I think it's one of those things that certainly as people who are buying property, and even as active investors, we need to have a better understanding of how this has also changed for estate agents and the different ways that they're potentially innovating or changing some of their own systems, because they need to be able to essentially do business in the digital world, which they didn't have to rely on as much previously. So to our viewers at home, how has the effect of COVID affected your real estate portfolio? I think a lot of us, certainly people who watch this show, have a property portfolio, whether you're starting one off or you've been in it, or you've had it rather for quite a significant amount of time. And of course, COVID came fairly unexpectedly. Some were more prepared than others. And different people have had, have been affected differently by the effects of COVID. So I want to hear how this crisis affected your portfolio and the different ways that you've gone in trying to mitigate those changes and adapt to the effects of COVID. I mean, we initially thought it's going to be 21 days. It's now many months. I've even stopped counting. I know it's probably going close to 200 days, but nobody's counting at this stage. So how have you been able to adapt to the changes that COVID has had on your property portfolio? We're going to go for a quick break and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 90 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. This evening, we're looking at the ways the COVID-19 has affected the South African real estate industry. A lot of us have been hard hit across different industries, but of course, we are focusing on the real estate industry. If you're a property investor and you've got, a portfolio, whether it's just a few years old or perhaps it's nearly a decade in, how has this particular crisis affected the way you're running your property business? And perhaps share with us the different systems or tools you've now put in place in order to mitigate the effect that COVID-19 has had on your property business. I think a lot of us certainly can learn from each other in terms of the best ways we can go about navigating this. We've said, I think it was even in episode 1 when we had Gil Sperling, the CEO of Flow, as well as Uzeki Mieza, who is the founder of Bastop Properties. And that first episode was around, the conversation that the tenant and the landlord are going to have given that we're now going into lockdown. And we were almost playing different scenarios, that in the event that your tenant is going to be affected by lockdown because they won't be able to work during the hard lockdown and they don't earn their full salary, how do you manage that particular conversation? If you're a landlord, how can you be proactive in having that conversation with your tenant? And now many episodes later, in episode 90, and we're certainly still talking about the effects of COVID-19, because I think the conversation has substantially changed. Over the months, the banks have come onto the party, offering various payment relief options for their clients. And different landlords have even shared right here on the Private Property Podcast that they've been proactive in having conversations with their tenants and giving them a discount for duration of this crisis, and whether it's a 10% discount if they're able to afford it, and just to ease things for their tenants. Because I think one of the things that you definitely do come to learn when you're running your property business is that good tenants tend to be quite hard to come by. And this is the one time where you want to stick together as much as possible and try to meet each other halfway as much as possible. So Kim, when we look at meeting each other halfway and trying to find different ways of doing business, we of course need to also consider how real estate agents have had to do things differently during this crisis because of COVID-19. Perhaps take us through in which ways COVID-19 has had an effect on how real estate agencies essentially do their day-to-day business.
Well, I definitely do think the pandemic has made many realize that they can work from home. Gone are the days where you meet a client, for instance, now that things have gone back to sort of normal for us, to take them a brochure when you meet up with them. Everything can be sent via email. Virtual tours is definitely something that I'm doing on every one of my properties, where I never did that before. It puts you at a different level, a different service level as well, where you can give the client so much more before they actually decide whether they want to meet you in person. It's saved a lot of time. It's saved a lot of paper, and I think it's given them the opportunity of seeing a little bit more about the property before they make the appointment. And also, I also definitely do believe there's been a massive saving in an office environment. We don't really need that office environment because you can work from home. Because what is it that we're really needing that office environment for? As an agent, you just need a desk. But if you can work from home, you can do exactly the same amount of work at home as you can in the office. The only difference is that you need to be a self-motivated person. You can't get up late. You've got to really be that positive, self-motivated person and head down and shove, if you know what I mean, if you're working from home, because no one's going to motivate you except for yourself. So I think it depends on whether you're that passionate person about property.
And I think, Kim, when we look at real estate right now, and certainly the changes that we're seeing, are you seeing some of the behaviors staying post-lockdown? I mean, I think a lot of us have been trying to adapt to living during lockdown. Some people are still living as though we're in level 5. But obviously, real estate agents, as you're saying, the moment there was a hard lockdown, they needed to find different ways to still be in business, even though they were in the comfort of their homes and couldn't conduct their day-to-day business the way they typically used to. Do you think that the changes that we've seen from the way that real estate agents conducted business during this lockdown is going to stay even after the lockdown?
I do. Just a little example. For instance, I've just been closing a deal on a property which belongs to a gentleman who lives in the UK. Before lockdown, if someone had to tell me to do a Zoom meeting to try and close a deal, I wouldn't even know what they were asking me to do. So I definitely do think there's a lot of things that we're going to carry into the future, and it's actually all positives. It's all a step towards moving forward in the real estate industry, actually. So gone are the days where it's all that old-fashioned, but many of the things are definitely going to resume. I don't care what anyone says, but to see a property with your own eyes is very different from seeing it on a virtual tour or an eye show. But saying that, I also want to mention it also depends on who that buyer is. An investor who's purchasing, for instance, an apartment where he has the floor plan, he knows the building or he knows what it looks like, he doesn't actually need to go in there and get that look and feel. But houses, I think, are very, very different. And the housing market, I do more sectional title. I sell in the V&A waterfront, and those V&A waterfronts, if you know the V&A waterfront, they all look very similar. You give them a floor plan, and if it's not an actual purchaser who's buying it for their own home, it's very easy to sell an apartment in the V&A just with the virtual tour and a floor plan.
And I think one of the things with that one is it also depends what kind of, and you were saying this just now, Kim, is if you're buying to live versus if you're buying as an investment, your considerations tend to typically be quite different. And so if you've bought a couple of times and you certainly know the floor plan, you're probably more interested in the financials of that sectional title, and the questions that you'd be asking or the information that you'd want from the estate agent is fundamentally different. So perhaps viewing for you in that context may not be as important as it typically would be if you have to live in that place. Because the moment you have to live,
I mean, the last Keegan, I can't hear Keegan.
Yes, you're saying the last thing, Kim?
No, sorry, I lost a little bit of signal there. No, just on that point, during the lockdown, I managed to secure 2 very successful sales, both with buyers that lived abroad. And they were not cheap properties. We're talking about a 36 and we're talking about a 15 million. And both the buyers never viewed that property themselves, but they felt very comfortable to purchase it after seeing a virtual video. So there's my point. It really just depends, who that buyer is, and they benefited from the fact that the rand was weak, so they jumped at it, and then they knew the area well.
We've got a comment here coming in from Anthony van der Riet, who says, now is the time to get more stock. And I think it's certainly one of those things that's probably for estate agents to be acquiring more stock. So making the calls, because I think you're probably going to see some distressed sellers. You might see some sellers who want to downgrade because perhaps they no longer afford to live in the bigger, whether houses or apartments that they live in now. And we've definitely had various experts who said, look, people's financial considerations now might be slightly different. So some of them will downgrade their homes. So as an estate agent, part of being proactive right now is seeing how many more apartments or houses you can essentially get. And I think even as an investor, then it probably is a good time right now, wouldn't you say, Kim, to be trying to acquire as many strategic assets, because you're seeing low interest rates, and there obviously these sales that are also coming in that are probably priced better than they were pre the crisis.
Look, I do believe there's quite a lot of stock on the market. Personally speaking, I don't see massive amounts of properties coming onto the market, because I'm dealing in a very different scenario. But I can tell you now, the properties that are listed for sale now, those owners want to sell. There's none of the properties that are coming onto the market now are coming from owners that are testing the market out. Those days are not here at the moment. We're sitting in a buyer's market. So anybody who wants to sell, they have a very, very short space of time to actually get that interest, because within a few days, there's another property that's outshining them, or it might be coming in at a better price. So it's very much, it's no longer position. It's about price. And if I think about the sales results that we've had over the last 2 months, it's all been on properties that have been priced correctly. I haven't sold anything that's above market value. So when the gentleman says it's time to get stock, I definitely do agree with that, but it has to be correctly priced stock. Otherwise, it's just going to sit like all the other listings online, and it's going to become stale and not sell.
And that's definitely a tip for investors who are looking to sell, or viewers at home who are looking to sell their property, that this is not the time to test the market. This is the time to correctly price your property, and it will sell quicker. There is quite a lot of stock coming onto the market. It's actually, when you keep looking, especially when you're monitoring areas, and let's say every second day you get the updates. Sometimes certain areas that I have on alert, almost every single day there are at least 2 properties coming on for that particular area. So right now is not the time you want to be testing whether your apartment or your house is going to sell for above market value. You actually just want to price it correctly, and it does go by quicker, because if it's going to stay in the market for 2 months, in the 2-month window period, so many more properties have gone on the market, and yours pretty much becomes a second thought, really, to a lot of people who are looking for property. But Kim, before I let you go, any tips or advice you'd like to give our viewers at home when it comes to navigating their property businesses, especially right now during COVID, when we're seeing various changes, and I think the different players, whether you're an estate agent, whether you're a tenant, whether you're an investor, we're all being affected, and affected differently and at different levels. But what kind of insight would you like to, or tips would you like to share with our viewers at home?
Well, first of all, I'd like to definitely share a tip possibly to a seller out there, who's looking to sell. Now's the time not to, to possibly be a little bit more open-minded if you get given a lower offer. There's that typical saying, your first offer is your best offer. And I've seen it time and time again throughout the years of being an agent, where you get an offer which might not be that great for a seller, but we as agents have to try and encourage these sellers to please look at this offer, because we don't know whether we're going to get another one, and we don't know whether it's going to be better than the one that's on the table. So that's just a tip that I've got for sellers. And with regards to agents, I sit in many Zoom meetings, and I see a lot of agents are feeling, very negative about what's happening in the market. And it is very, very tough. It's not the time to sit and wait for inquiries to come through, because they're not going to come through. You've got to identify the owners that are looking to, that need to sell. So you've got to be on top of your game, understand who your owners are, work on those owners, build the relationship with those owners, and not sit and wait for buyers to come to you. You've actually got to pick up the phone. You've got to go to your lists of your previous investors and find a property for them or give them ideas. So I possibly want to just give the tip to agents out there to be positive, and just to get out there and not wait for the business to come to them, because it's not going to happen, and that's just going to put them into a negative space.
Kim, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
And that is Kim Bailey, who's a sales agent at Seeff Property Group. I think a lot of us are trying to find different ways to navigate, the property sector during COVID-19 crisis, and perhaps even thinking what a post-COVID world looks like. And I know there are varying debates around post-COVID activity, whether that's even a thing, or we must just accept that COVID is a thing that's going to be here to stay for quite a significantly long period of time. And it's about how you navigate it than trying to think you're going to go back to the way that things are. But I certainly do hope that we are going to be able to learn from each other in terms of making sure that we bulletproof our property portfolios as much as possible during this period, and also innovate in how we are running our property businesses, because as we continuously keep emphasizing, having the right systems in place is crucial, especially when you end up facing a crisis like this that you probably could never anticipate. I think a lot of us as property investors, there are certain crises that we can plan for and adequately prepare for, but this one probably isn't one that we could have anticipated. So I do hope that we'll continue the conversation on our social media platforms and learn from each other about how to best get through this COVID storm and make sure that our property businesses are still afloat post the storm. Well, folks, that's it from us here on the Private Property Podcast. It has been a pleasure to be with you. We're back again tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. And until then, as usual, hoping you're staying home, staying safe, and keeping warm.
Hi, I'm Brian Kepper. I'm a 10-time South African motorcycling champion. My family and I have chosen to live in Fourways. There's some really great suburbs in our neighborhood. There's a lot of families living in the surrounding areas, in places like Lone Hill and Cedar Lakes. What draws people to Cedar Lakes is that it's so close to the Broadacre Shopping Centre, Cedar Square, and Fourways Life Hospital. Lone Hill is a major draw card for many families. It's got some great smaller commercial centres and some fantastic schools like Crawford College. From an entertainment point of view, Monte Casino really comes alive at night. There's so much on the go, and there's an incredible energy in the area. Our family just loves the fast-paced lifestyle that Fourways brings. But honestly, the thing that attracted us most to this area was the active lifestyle that it offers. As a family, we've chosen to live in Fourways because of the lifestyle and convenience, and this is our neighborhood.
tips for dealing with the bank. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate.
Understanding the basic calculation, income minus expenses, and you want to be left with a positive income.
It is a very tough game. It's not easy at all.
To stay ahead of knowing exactly what your clients need, what their teething issues are.
Have a joint move-in inspection.
That a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are, just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes.
They get to see the perspective from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
It's a market that's estimated to be transacting at least 9 billion rand per year. So it's a huge market.
In order to get there, you need to be able to build up a track record.
Your cash flow model needs to be sharp.
A quote comes to mind. The best time to buy a property was about 10 years ago. The next best time is now.